Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Impact Statements, your favorite podcast brought to you by the teammates here at Impact Gaming Center. I'm Jake, hanging out with some of my familiar teammates. We got Lincoln. What's up,
Hello,
Lincoln?
hello.
Johnny
Hi.
and Paul.
Johnny's got so much energy. I love it.
Well, we got a pretty good one for you guys today. We're going to be talking about some Magic decks, recent modern showcases, a big tournament that happened in South America, a one that happened overseas. I assume it's one of the Asia Pacific tournaments. And then we will be talking about Blink in Modern, a deck that a lot of us have been playing and really enjoying. But before we get into it, let's thank our sponsor for today, Impact Gaming Center. Impact Gaming Center is located a short 20-minute drive outside of St. Louis City, located in the fabulous Fairview Heights, Illinois. Impact is St. Louis's premier gaming store, having hundreds of singles in Magic, Pokemon, One Piece, Lorcana, and now Riftbound, along with tons of TCG singles and supplies. The shop offers a large selection of Warhammer, board games, and Legos for all your hobby needs. Make sure you check out the shop online at impactgamingcenter.gg. If you're also visiting the area and looking for something to do, make sure to swing by the shop and check out their huge LAN center, where you can play all of your favorite PC games, like League of Legends, which is just like the new Riftbound TCG. And finally, if you're a fan of live streaming and paper magic content, make sure you check out twitch.tv/Impact Gaming Center and Impact Gaming Center on all other social media channels like YouTube and Twitch for some awesome paper magic content. Now they got out of the way, Lincoln, let's get started. What do you got for us?
Absolutely. So I think we should just go ahead and lean right into the recent NRG. I know we've been talking a little bit about Simic Ritual. We've been talking about it a lot as a team, been talking about it a little bit on our last podcast episodes, and it kind of showed up in a really big way at the most recent NRG. So, Johnny, I know you're kind of the most into this Simic Ritual deck, so give me a quick rundown.
Well, it looked like it met in the finals. This is a deck that I had a feeling was going to start appearing in larger numbers. Um, because if you look at some of the data tells you that in the current meta, it has a 58% win across the board with 411
That's
matches.
wild.
That's a
Which,
lot of wins.
which I understand it's a bit of a smaller sample size compared to like when you see like Jeskai Blink at like 2,000 and Amulet at like almost 2,700, and then Affinity just under 2,000, which I get that, right? But I think being 58%, that was almost like where like it might actually be higher than what Goryo's Vengeance and like Tarbelcher were going into the Pro Tour. And I remember like they had some really high 50%. And I think, and according to the data, I mean like if your plan was to attack just Sky Blank and just outgrind, I mean you are a winner, right? For the most part, I think there's a couple matchups that like you definitely want to dodge, but you're pretty clean across the board. So I think it sounds like to me that the meta just really lined up well for over in paper. And then also like not to segue too much, but if you look at even there was a copy in the South American regional championship, but I think it had a black splash to it. And then you also saw it get 10th over in the I think it's the
Asia.
Southeast Asia regional championships. So either way, like it's starting to kind of make some waves, and then you kind of notice it's kind of popping up online. I don't think the best build's been figured out yet. Just I've also been kind of doing some of my own testing, and I've been trying a few other different things. But I think considering like what the top 16 was made up of, I mean there's a couple matchups you wanted to dodge for sure, but you had a lot of gas and you had a lot of staying power. So, but I think in general we should really make a note of was the top eight of the energy, right? Um, so you had four blink in total, just Sky Blink. You had the only two Simic Ritual decks in top 16 were in the finals. You had three Prowess. You had a Storm. You had two copies of Amulet. You had a Gora's Vengeance. You had a Brute Scale, and then you had two Boros Energy, which I think, for the most part, besides Titan and Gorios, in Storm, like the meta's looking pretty fair, and I
hmm
think we're kind of starting to see a lot of fair magic put into play. And I think um, I'm gonna make the assumption that the Storm player in the Brute Scale player, we're kind of getting the same read, so they were trying to play something that a little bit had some unfairness to it. to try to like have a couple I win buttons. And quite honestly, like I think they also made a good call to like try to kind of like you know, try to what's the word I'm thinking of? Try to like, get ahead of the game. So it looks like they had some success by getting ahead of the game there. But that's what it's looking like to me. Is I think that there's a lot of on the board magic, which I think people have been really wanting for a little while, and we've been finally getting it in these last few weeks, and makes me think we're gonna have a huge shift coming into Vegas.
So, question about the brood scale and taking a peek at it. I'm not a brood scale expert and never will claim to be, but as I've seen the deck evolve and change over time, it feels like brood scale has gone a little bit away from the combo part of it and has become more just a combo deck with a really good Eldrazi cards package.
Yeah, that's kind of the way it's moved on. Like it still runs the combo package, but the Eldrazi package itself is just so good by itself. It just likes to keep that I win button in the Blade of the Bloodchief combo.
Gotcha. It seems really good. It seems really powerful, and I think playing a combo deck in a fair deck shell seems to be a pretty good spot to be right now for a lot of decks.
Yeah. So go ahead, Johnny.
You also like still get Urza Saga, and in my opinion, like if you want to talk about a deck that can really maximize the use of Urza Saga for trying to get a game plan, I think the Brood Scale deck I always thought was the best Urza Saga deck because you get access to like the combo, you can get access to ramp, you can get access to the thing that is the premier hate card that's even main decking. I was playing at Storm the other day and they're maining it is Vexing Bobble.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're starting to see Vexing Bobble just like it's a really crucial piece, especially for a deck like this with this combo. Going turn one like Vexing Bobble, like all right, have fun with your Solitude. Like I'm going to try to combo you. Like those hands are pretty powerful, and then like you could just also like with this deck specifically, you could just lean on the Urza Saga train, and you could just play the mid range, and then or you could go the ramp route, which was what Gruul version was kind of trying to do with Crystallis and Emrakul. But this list looks like it's going harder on. It's going to ramp. It's going to turn 3 kill you, or it's going to just find a way to get Emrakul out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So these lists are really interesting. I think kind of like what Paul said, the Eldrazi package is just so good. It really forces you to deal with what's on the board. And oftentimes against Eldrazi, you don't go positive playing the fair game against them. They've got their cast triggers that they're getting, so your 1-for-1 removal is really like a 0.75 for one trade. And it's just, it makes dealing with the fair game plan really awkward. So being able to just kind of out of left field, I win the game now, is just really awkward because you have to be constantly playing to keep that in mind while you're getting swung at by, these 4/4 brood scale if that's what they have, and they're swinging something at you. And if you're playing a control deck, especially, you spend a lot of your time mana just taking free damage to the fair plan because you have to be prepared that if they have Blade here, I just lose, and that is a really great spot to be. I do want to talk a bit about the ritual deck and that it does a few. Both of these lists, Johnny mentioned it already, we don't seem to have a clear agreement on what the best shell is for this. Even so, these lists are very homogenous already. There's a lot of agreement so far with just plus minus a few cards. So I'm curious to see how this evolves. I would hate to see this deck fall prey to net decking a little too soon. I think there's a lot of room here to kind of brew up deck lists that kind of use cards that we don't normally see, right? Birthing Ritual is just such an awkward card to go find toolbox creatures, and I would love to see people brew a little bit more. Looking at it right now, these lists are just very homogenous thus far, and people are playing around with 1 or 2 different cards, but I would really love to see another Pro Tour come around where we were seeing, 17 copies of different cards in a list to happen to Simic Ritual to get a really good idea of what someone would want to try to do with this list to prepare for, Vegas or something of the sort.
What is this deck doing that puts it so far ahead in the game plan? Is it just having a strong little dudes good counter spells and efficient low drop creatures. What's it beating up right now?
You're more consistent at the 2-for-1 game. Like every card in your deck is a value card, just about, right? So like if you take, for example, like Coiling Oracle replaced itself. Fiddle Flip can sometimes have upside. Quaddle, right? It's Shardless Agent. Sometimes it's a 3-for-1. So you're doing so much value, and I think the other trick with the deck is too is in my testing, there's a lot of traps in the deck. And I think what we see a lot of is like you see a lot of people think like, okay, like we're just gonna cheat Oculus. No, that's not always the plan. Sometimes it's like the correct play is like, okay, I'm just gonna sack my 2-drop for another 2-drop, and then to another 2-drop, and to another 2-drop, and just generate so much card draw and value to where I'm like, okay, now I'm gonna go get the Oculus. Now that I've loaded up on Subtleties, Forces, and like Flares, and I've got the pieces that I need, or I just need to kind of like grind the game out. Like this deck is super grindy. Like in my testing, there's been a couple times where I've been at the verge of milling myself out. Especially if I don't have access to a endurance. So I think the deck's just really good at just outvaluing you, and also like Oculus creates value. Some of these lists that are playing Brazen Borrower, another 2-for-1. Endurance is just a solid creature that also is really important to possibly put your deck back together after you've kind of gone through it, because you go through cards really fast in this deck. And you also are playing a lot of pitch spells between Subtlety, Force, Flare Denial, kind of as a free spell, and then out of the board when you go to Force of Vigor, like Force of Vigor and like all these other cards here, like early on you can afford to just like empty your hand, because later in the game you're going to recur all that value. So I think that's why it's so good in the mid-range mirrors, and you also get a lot of free counter spells. So like so you can also kind of play an aggressive plan if you can too. So the one iteration that I'm noticing so far is that I've been seeing a lot of black splashing for Culling Ritual, and I have some mixed opinions about it. Because I keep looking at this, I'm like, why would I want to do this for 4 mana? I keep wondering, like, why don't we just, if that's the plan, then why don't we go in for a white splash, and then maybe trying to go with, Wrath of the Skies, and then maybe you can get some other like good white cards. But I think that's my only critique so far. I think the decks. I think we're gonna figure out in a few weeks what's the best build.
Yeah, so Jake, I really like your question. I want to circle back to it. You said, what is this deck really beating up? And looking at its win rates, it's really polarized. So it has a 36% win rate into Boros Energy, which makes sense, right? I play fair and I play it better. It has a 37% win rate into Is It Prowess? Yeah, that's another really scary one, right? You just have to answer all of these dudes. And a 39% win rate into Affinity. So again, I kind of force you to have it and have it early, and that's difficult to do when you don't have time to develop and hold up a bunch of Flare Denials and all that fun stuff. However, as I said, it's extremely polarizing. It has a 72% win rate into Amulet Titan.
Yeah, I'm not sure how Amulet beats this deck.
73% win rate against Esper Reanimator. It's next lowest on this list is a 54 to Domain Aggro, followed by an 81 against the Esper Blink variant and a 63 against the Jeskai Blink variant. So holy cow, right? It's extremely polarizing. It loses hard to a couple of things, but it actually seems to win hard into a lot more. And in a field where we're seeing quite a bit fewer of these decks, it can show up in a really big way, especially with Amulet Titan being so big. All of that. Yeah, go ahead.
Especially like it's because like the only two bad matchups, like according to like the data I was seeing, is like I said, like you were saying, is Affinity and like in Is It Prowess, which I think is really interesting too, right? Because if you look, because for some reason you'd think that you would also like have issues with Boros Energy on that same axis, but like you have a 56% against Boros Energy, which is interesting to me. But I can see where Prowess is like an absolute, like you just want to dodge that at all times, and like Affinity, I think you need a lot of help post board. Like you need to have your Mystical Disputes and be on the play and somehow like, dodge a bullet on the draw game 3 type thing. Like I just feel like Affinity is always going to be an uphill battle, and I feel like the Prowess matchup is just something I always want to avoid. Like I just don't want to see it, and just maybe that's your game plan, is just dodge Prowess and hope for the best.
Yeah. So one thing that I do want to really mention with this list is we identified the big losers and the big winners, and they have something very in common, and it's moon effects. We talked about moon effects a little bit in our last few episodes, that they seem like they're really good. You'll notice that the decks that it beats, Amulet Titan, Esper Reanimator, the Blink variants, Domain, are all very susceptible to moon effects, and the ones that it's losing to, Energy, Prowess, Affinity, are not susceptible to moon effects at all. And I think this is just the power of being able to dig 7 cards deep and say, here's a Harbinger on the table with no ability to respond to it.
Yeah.
I think that plays a really big part in this deck's ability to win. So with that, Ritual looks like it's a deck we need to start planning for. It's a deck we need to start adjusting our sideboards for. We need to be prepared for it to show up in big ways to these tournaments. We need to be prepared for it to show up to Vegas. So we're gonna pivot a bit to talk about our sideboarding adjustments soon. But before we do that, let's go ahead and move to the next RC. We talked about it very briefly. There was an RC in South America. It was it happened in Sao Paulo, in Brazil. And once again, the winner was Jeskai Ephemerate. And that's going to be a theme that comes up quite a bit, is Jeskai Blink does a lot of winning. Boros Energy is back into the top 8s consistently. It was a semi-finalist and a finalist. So you can't start trimming out your sideboard answers to Boros Energy yet. But we're seeing even more Blink show up and be a problem. And I'm wondering if that's why Birthing Ritual is getting, catching on so big, is that Jeskai's showing up in such a big way. But I'm really curious to hear your guys' thoughts on that. The meta really seems to be moving towards Blink being answered by Birthing Ritual game plan. What do we want to do about that?
So,
Go
I
ahead.
guess, do we want to talk about this on a larger, do we want to talk about some larger axis of Blink in the meta? Because Blink is everywhere.
Yeah.
Blink is, looking through a lot of these deck results, I see Jeskai Blink, Jeskai Blink, Jeskai Blink. Is this perhaps more of a symptom of doing well at a big tournament, and tournament grinders are following in suit by playing a deck that performed really well? It's difficult to play, but I don't think it's near like Amulet Titan levels of difficulty. It definitely doesn't have a lot of lines, but it is also a deck that takes advantage of what other decks are doing in the meta right now, where, sometimes with Gorios, you just have hands that just don't really pan out. Same with Affinity. Domain can sometimes just lose to itself or just runs out of gas. But these Blink lists don't run out of gas at all. And they have efficient creature removal. They have hyper efficient permanent based removal. And the creatures they're playing are pretty respectable in size. Phelia's a good card. Phlage is a good card.
Mhm.
Quantum Riddler is a big dude. Solitude, is a 3/2, but still wins games really well. That's my take on it. Is Blink too much of a problem overall?
I think the meta just needs time to adjust. Like you said, it's the flavor of the week, but it's also a very good flavor of the week. And not to just sit here and repeat what you said, but it doesn't run out of gas really ever. It can continually refill itself. It has the best turn 1 play probably right now with Ragavan into Phalia, into Flay. You can answer things with Solitude. Having 4 consigned to memory in the main board is really good in the world right now, because you can even, you obviously can consign your Blink triggers, but you can also use consign to make Phalia into a removal spell, which is just wild. So I don't think it's a problem, but it definitely, the meta needs to adjust. And it seems to be adjusting with Simic Ritual. Simic Ritual is a very good counterpoint to Blink. Let's see what Blink does. People are starting to pick up the Ritual deck that's not there in big numbers. I think it's going to be by the time we hit Vegas, but let's see what how the meta pivots here.
Yeah, and I know I've talked about this before, that it's important that we don't adjust to what just happened. We adjust to what we predict is going to happen. And of course, what just happened is a really big indicator of what's coming. But it's really important that we start thinking about, when Vegas gets here, what's going to show up in big numbers? What am I sacrificing in my sideboard? What am I bringing up? Johnny, you look like you've got a thought there.
A good example of that, look at Gruul Broodscale. If you look at a common thing that they're doing right now, because there's also a top 8 in each one of the regional championships, and then there was a There's one that like placed in the energy. Look how many Vexing Baubles are now in their 75.
Yep.
Like that is their plan. Is like because if you think about it, against all these decks, you literally just go, okay, I'm gonna put this turn 1 Vexing Bauble, and I'm just gonna ignore what you're doing, and I'm gonna go play my fair game plan, and then if I have this combo that now can't be stopped by Solitude, you're gonna have to use your consigns that way. But also you can just play this fair game plan, which is why I think Broodskill is doing really well right now, because it's an Urza Saga deck that will just go find the Vexing Bauble, and also like the worst case about Vexing Bauble, if it doesn't work, you just cycle it, right? And I think this is kind of like a way to attack, knowing that like the Simic decks are kind of showing up, because I think you're probably going to have it. I'll have to look at what the data says with it, because it's also kind of hard to find like the data with these Broodscale decks, because I think some of them are kind of lumped in between Gruul, Eldrazi, or some are called Blood Chief combo, so it's hard to find the data. But I think in theory that's why these decks are starting to pop up, because they're fair, but they have that hint of unfairness. And it kind of goes to like what I think the meta is going to turn to, is I think the combo decks are going to show back up here soon. Because if the meta is super fair, then now you just got to figure out which combo decks are going to start appearing.
Yeah.
So the combo decks that are going to be appearing, I mean, Amulet Titan, right? Showed up in a huge way and was a really big problem very recently. But looking at this top 32, there is one Amulet Titan player. Yeah, and that's it. Which is just really interesting to see that I think being able to play these moon effects a bit more effectively is going to help deal with Amulet Titan as well as some of these blank options. And I think that's where we're seeing Boros Energy come back from, is that it looks like the conventional wisdom has now moved back to 3 copies of Blood Moon, 2 in the main, 1 in the side. I think that's a brilliant way to be playing Energy, is just get access to those moon effects and really punish whatever it is your opponent is trying to do. But I think that there's a lot of room for the meta to shift one way or the other. I'm curious to see if Ruby Storm makes a big comeback. I think Ruby Storm looks like it's positioned interestingly well, and might be in a really good spot to show back up in a huge way.
I think that's kind of like where I think it's going to pop up. But also the other thing is like mainboard consign sometimes can do work against that deck. So I think, but also I can see worlds where like the Storm players just find a way to get around that anyway. But I think right now, I think Storm is, I think in theory should be a really good position to be in, and like that's like a deck that I would probably start having some concern over. And then I think another deck, I don't know why I have one thing I've noticed too, especially with how some of these decks are with the grindiness. Somebody was telling me the other day that like they thought Mill was in a good position, which I had to really think about that for a minute. But they're saying because right now, because the meta is not really that fast, and you could kind of just outgrind a lot of these decks too, because a lot of these decks are trying to also, they don't kill as fast because they're going through so many cards, and if they're also churning through so many cards, they're not killing as fast. Like Mill could, in some metas, could also be might actually be something to think about. So
yeah,
I've never thought about that, but
hilariously enough, Mill did show up in the top 16 of, I believe it was the 20k RCQ for the Laughing Dragon. Yeah, it was the top 16 Blue Black Mill, which is just hilarious, right? There's always going to be somebody at your RCQ or your F&M playing Mill.
I never thought those words would ever come out of my mouth, but like I've been thinking, I'm like, maybe this is like the 1 or 2 weeks meta where like Mill is actually kind of appealing. But I mean, right now, if you look at the data set, it's got a 47 win percent. But also, if you think Amulet's still going to show up, like you have a pretty good Amulet matchup, and you also have a pretty fair like Gorios matchup. And I'm trying to find what's the other good matchups right now, but that could be something to think about. But did you also notice, Lincoln, that your pet deck has also had like a 51 win rate right now?
Yeah, I have. I'm trying to make miracles work out, trying really hard, and it's been working pretty well. Like all things considered, I'm not mad about it. It's been very strange, and I'm gonna talk everybody's ear off about miracles in a moment. But I do really quick want to pass it over to Jake. He's got something to say.
So if I can, before we jump tournament stuff, jump in the spice corner. for like 2 decks. First one is in 7th place. There was an Orzhov Blink list that was still playing Ketramos, and I think that's really cool that there are still some people who are on the I'm believing in the Ketramos train, and I'm always going to be there for it.
When'd you get 7th place in the tournament, Jake?
I wish it was. No, this was Mauricio. Got 7th
That's
place.
Jake.
I wish it was. And then down in the real Spice corner at 18th is a deck labeled Rakdos Affinity. And it was played by Nico Days. And they had Sorin Vein Ripper combo in their deck. Is this something? It's just Rakdos midrange with the Sorin Vein Ripper combo with Ragavan, Doffy Voidwalkers, Bowmasters.
What year is it? Hold on.
I think we're just playing Pioneer in like 2022, I guess. But
Are there Griefs and Furies? Are you on the wrong year, Jake?
no, this is real.
It
November
is.
1st,
I'm looking right
2025.
at it. And I would be remiss, Jake, if I didn't say, look at that. There's 2 copies of Blood Moon in the main. Looks like moons
I
have something to do
agree.
with winning.
So is this just like like Sorin Vein Ripper's cool, but I wonder how much power is in these 2 black 2-drops and Doffy Voidwalker, which is really, really good versus all of the graveyard decks.
That's a point.
And Eldrazi decks where you can rip the big Eldrazi out of their hand and just cast her for free. And then Bowmasters probably has a fair amount of play versus the Ephemerate decks that don't really want to waste a Solitude on a Bowmasters, but are going to draw a bunch of cards. And if you catch them at the wrong time, you can start hitting them for 1 to 3 damage. Bowmasters blocks Philia really well. I just think two decks I wanted before we jump off this current event. That seems really, really cool.
And I've said it a lot, and I'm going to say it again. Modern is in such a healthy place because you can brew like this and see legitimate success. This format continues to feel like it will never be solved, and the meta will just continue to rotate. We will see more new things and experience more cool new things. With that, I am really curious for us to start talking about, we had kind of carved out a section where we wanted to discuss Blink, but I actually want to change course just a little bit from that and think that Blink is big, Ritual is big, we're seeing moon effects be really huge, and Vegas is coming up. And I don't know about you guys, I intend to do real well at Vegas. So I need to start thinking about how I'm going to make adjustments to my lists and what my answers are going to be. So I'm curious to hear from you guys. What are you thinking we need to be doing to prepare for Vegas? What should we be trying out? What cards need to start going in our 75? What needs to start coming out of our 75?
So
I'll go first. Yeah.
you go ahead, Lincoln.
Yeah. Containment Priest is the first card that I have been looking at. And I've been on the fence about it. I'll be honest right now, I don't know that it's the right play. But it does play pretty well into Simic Ritual, and it stops them from being able to dig any deeper. It has Flash, so you're able to navigate some of those pesky counter spells that the deck has access to, or force them to throw a Flare of Denial at it, which can feel pretty good. And it also deals with some of the blink problems. The big reason that Containment Priest doesn't feel good is that these decks are kind of moving to Consign to Memory as a way to keep their bodies around, as opposed to Ephemerate. Which does mean Warp is a casting cost and Evoke is casting. So it doesn't, Containment Priest only exiles if they would enter but weren't cast. However, Containment Priest does have a really, really good ability to show up in Amulet Titan by answering Green Sun Zenith. And it also deals really well with Goryo's Vengeance. That turns out an Atraxa entering from the graveyard is not cast, so that goes straight into exile. So I've been thinking a lot about Containment Priest, and I'm trying to find out if it's robust enough to be the right play, but that's the first card that I'm thinking about using to adjust my Miracles list.
So I like Containment Priest. As someone who's played quite a bit of Containment Priest in their life, what the card does, I don't feel like there's that great of a replacement for other than like Hollow Moonlight, but that card, I don't know, like having a permanent seems a little bit better than an instant.
Yeah.
Currently, I like Containment Priest a lot. I think the one downside sometimes to Containment Priest is if it's only to me it's only really good when you're playing a deck that's also not going to get hit by it, or that plays really around by its own effects. Blink, it's really cool when you blink in your you're flashing your Containment Priest in response to a failure trigger, and you get them really good by exiling one of their things permanently. But then it feels really bad when, you've been playing for all day, you're around like 5, 6, and you play into your own Containment Priest by accident. So I do think it's a double-edged sword. Part of me wonders if cards I think that should be looking at a little bit more is black 2-drops, specifically Dothy, Voidwalker, Emperor of Bones, and Orcish Bowmasters. I think each one of those cards hits the format in a very specific way that feels really powerful. I know they don't fit into a lot of the current shells, but I think Emperor of Bones is really good into specifically mid-range really, really well, as it just eats the cards out of the graveyard that matters. I think Bowmasters has a lot of play as well. Those are cards I think are pretty cool to, start thinking about.
Yeah.
Johnny, Paul, what are you thinking?
I'm currently leaning more on the affinity side of things going into Vegas, just because affinity having access to Urza's Saga and kind of pivoting a little bit more towards this weapons manufacturing package, right? You have a lot of the sideboard hate cards available to you in the main deck pretty easily. Like, just the list I'm looking at here is running 3 Tormod's Crypts, the Vexing Bauble already in the main deck to handle some of these blink lists, these ritual lists. And Blastoise is still a heck of a Magic card. You can still power out a turn 2 Blastoise or a turn 1 Blastoise, and I don't care what you're doing, you ain't answering that very well.
Fully agree with that. I think Kappa Cannoneer is just super. It's just a super prevalent threat. Johnny, what kind of cards are you thinking about adding to your 75 if you want to be competitive in this meta?
Well, I'm kind of comfortable always having access to some sort of Wrath of the Skies effect in my 75. Because it seems like right now in the meta, if this is the current meta that stays the way it is, that card's pretty live against a lot of matchups. I also want to have copies of Consign. I also think Stern Scolding is looking really good right now because it's still good against Boros. I think it's pretty solid against these ritual decks, right? It's not letting the card hit the table. It's very mana efficient. I also think Mystical Dispute is a card that I need to make sure I'm having access to fight some of these decks. It's any kind of mid-rangey kind of decks, any kind of way to kind of... I also think 3 Fairy. I want to try to maybe have access to 3 Fairy right now.
3 Fairy's feasting at the moment.
Yeah, that card is, but it's also, it's also getting a lot of targets on its back right now too. So I guess something in the Bant wheel is kind of calling my name. I've tested some things, but I'm really not really sold on anything yet. And also, to be honest, like seeing some of these brood scale decks kind of pop up makes me kind of ponder some things.
So there's a lot of... Go ahead, Jake.
Picking back off a lot of what Johnny said, I think Strict Serenade is another really cool card that could see a lot of play. It hits pretty much everything out of the Blink deck: creatures, planeswalkers, enchantments. I saw some Zoo lists running around with that. Not that I'm a little bit on Zoo. I feel like Zoo's the deck that you're gonna pub stomp with. I feel like it goes in, it does its thing, but when you're playing against people who know how to dismember it and take it down, it definitely feels a little less good. Dak Faden topped a Modern League with it. He was playing Strict Serenade. I saw his post on X about it and talking about how it seems really good to counter your Blink opponent's cards, and then when you just flage it away, it doesn't really matter. Or, what's a 2/2 going to do against a Territorial Kavu or a Sign of Draco? That doesn't do anything against these big giant bodies. So I like Zoo. I don't know if I love Zoo. I like Strict Serenade though. That's a card that I really think is cool.
It also works as that answer to 3 Fairy that we were talking about. That 3 Fairy causes some pretty serious issues for the format because it just stops anybody's ability to play the Blink game plan. Decks have moved to using Consign instead of Ephemerate, and it forces you to Ephemerate on your main phase instead of consigning a trigger if you just can't let him interact on the stack. The thing that Miracles has helped me see a lot, and before I was playing Miracles, I was doing the really similar just control chant list, and I'm noticing that interacting before the stack is almost more important, if not legitimately more important. That Teferi, Narset, High Noon, Disruptor Flute, cards that interact before the stack ever starts seem to be in a really healthy place right now because these decks, especially when you play a fair deck, you want to be really well on curve. You have a great plan to navigate through the game and have just really well curved out plays to be establishing your board and then applying constant pressure. It's kind of what these fair decks do. And by interacting before the stack, it can make your opponent have to play really awkward ways. So I bring that up to say Meddling Mage question mark. I've been thinking about it quite a bit. Meddling Mage, if you're not familiar with it, another wizard like Containment Priest that just says when it enters, name a non-land card. The name's card can't be played. And that feels like it has a lot of value. The big problem with it is that, as we were talking about fair decks don't tend to need one card to win the game. They tend to win the game through a lot of things. And it does make Meddling Mage not look so hot right now.
I mean, I love me some Meddling Mage. I think Meddling Mage is cool with cards like Flame of Anor. I don't know if it's where you want to be in control lists. I like that card, but I don't know if I agree with you on that one.
Yeah, hey, totally fair, totally reasonable.
I can see Meddling Mage maybe actually being something that the Blink decks could utilize as a sideboard piece. You know, what's one thing that the Blink deck doesn't want to see? Okay, name that, and then if that plan changes, blink the Meddling Mage and turn that into something else.
Now, that is a plan I had not considered. I like that a lot.
I have a question on that.
Yeah.
So since we keep talking about it, we keep kind of going back to all four of us have now made, references about either cards that are in Blink, that are, what we have to deal with, or like or different kind of tricks and combos, and we keep kind of going back to Blink. I think we need to kind of have this conversation. Like, is this the best archetype? Or like, is this the best archetype? Because we've seen it go from Orzhov to Esper to then like that like couple weekends of the Esper vert being more on the mirror. Now we're at Jeskai. Like, is this the, or is it going to continue to evolve? Like, where are we at with this archetype?
I mean, realistically, it's Blink, but it's just big mid-range. It's all the best creatures and all the best spells. Those spells just happen to contain Blink effects or work well with Blink effects. We're heading straight for a mid-range soup meta. And I don't necessarily hate that. You know, it's a lot of fair decks beating their heads against each other, and that's just Magic as Garfield intended. But it's just the best fair cards in the game, and then once that starts picking up, then here comes the unfair decks again, and we're just in that cycle that Modern is always in. We're just at a different spike of it.
I think the Blink package has a unique way of breaking or exploiting a lot of functions of the game. And I think that's part of why we see it matter so much and continue to see all these new iterations. So, for example, these lists are always going to play well off of ETB effects. ETB effects are always going to be around, but these decks will continue to find new ways to interact with these ETBs that can help make them hyper powerful.
Right.
It interacts really well with these I enter with counters that inhibit me, which is currently mostly just Overlord of the Baelmerk is where we see it. And we're seeing that go away completely, right? As lists move more to Jeskai Blink instead of Esper Blink. But the deck has the ability to break the those kinds of cards that enter with counters and you have to wait out the counters. The deck breaks triggered abilities like Escape by having Consigned to Memory or Warp. So I think the deck just kind of interacts really strangely with a whole bunch of different functions of the game that mean that it's always able to evolve, to find some new facet, to lean into a different type of ETB effect, to, interact with the meta in a certain way that gives it a lot of flexibility.
It almost seems like Ephemerate's actually the worst card in the Jeskai versions.
You notice
Yeah,
they're cutting
yeah.
a lot of it. They're down to
Yes.
maybe 2 at most in lists now. They're really relying on Consign.
Well, because you think about it with Consign, right? You can dash a Ragavan, consign the trigger. You can, the Warp trigger on Quantum Riddler, Solitude Evoke trigger, Flage. You can just have a turn 4 Flage. You can, Phalia. Like, you could permanently remove something with Phalia. Like, you can literally do anything you want, like, with Consign. Whereas Ephemerate is, like, maximized by Solitude or the Riddler, I mean, like, I guess you could, like, Ephemerate Afflage if you're really trying to, like, get some burn points in, but then you're gonna, like, I don't know, I feel like that's just kind of meh, unless you're trying to burn them out, and then maybe a Ragavan, but even then, like, that doesn't feel good. So, like, I almost feel like, at this point, like, where I think the Jeskai deck is just really taken off, kind of like Lincoln said, is, like, the fact that you can play 4 Consigns main, that also frees up 4 sideboard slots. If you think about it, de facto, like, all these decks are playing like 3 to 4 consigns. Now you just opened up so many more sideboard slots that you can now, like, actually play a bunch of other, like, sideboard cards. Because Modern's so big, it's hard to sometimes fit 15 cards in. But now that you just cheated 4 of those into your main deck, now you have all this opportunity to, like, pick your poison of how you want to attack other decks.
So, on that topic, do we feel Consign should stay in the format? Because I feel like Consign is a massive double-edged sword, where I can't imagine they printed Consign to memory with the intent of being able to counter your own possible negative downside triggered abilities. I feel like that was not what the card was meant to be. I feel like it was meant to be put in the format to have a floodgate valve versus all of these Eldrazi and cast trigger abilities, because before Consign to Memory, we really didn't have. Stifle has never been put into Modern. Not that I think Stifle should be put into Modern. I think that card's a little too good.
Stifle your fetch
but
land.
yeah, it's a little mean, but Consign to Memory, I feel like it's having a lot of negative effects to where they didn't fully think about, maybe if you put Consign on a ability that says counter target colorless spell or triggered ability you don't own.
Mm-hmm.
Like, would that have made the card as predominant as it is now? I mean, you have to run it for Eldrazi, and if we ban it out of the format, then Eldrazi I think Eldrazi gobbles it up without anyone's right to say no.
Agreed. I think if you remove Consign, what you're going to do is you'll have to ban 70% of the existing makeup of these Tron lists, just to keep them from completely taking over. And the format will move to, in an odd way, the format will move to Tron decks or decks that combo without being able to be interacted with by Tron, like Ruby Storm. But I do think that Consign is one of those cards that, one of the things that I like to say is that a card is a candidate to be banned when you cannot print cards of X nature, right, of some type of nature, without first thinking, how does it interact with this card? And Consign to Memory has just done that with triggered abilities. Every time we print a triggered ability, we have to wonder, how does Consign play with this? And I think that's a really interesting place to be. I do think it's going to stop people from printing another Dark Depths type thing into Modern, where you go, here's my Flage that costs 2 more mana, but basically says I win the game with the triggered ability on its escape that I can consign, right? So it's gonna put an interesting piece in place for any future brewing of the Modern format or for any cards that are made. Johnny, what are your thoughts on that?
So here's my hot take. I think this goes back to an interesting, like, different rant that I have about, like, so if you look at the Jeskai blank deck, if you look at besides Quantum Riddler, Teferi, and Fable in this one list by, I think it's by Menenguchi's list, it's all MH2 and MH3 cards, which like, let's really think about this for a minute, right? Like, these 2 Modern sets that are supposed to enhance the set are literally, like, really, those 2 sets alone is breaking the format.
Yeah, the format's warping around the Horizon sets.
So it almost feels like, to me, which this is kind of like a weird hot take that I think we are in right now. It almost feels like, the Modern Horizon set has to go, it's going to be bigger when Modern Horizons 4 comes out, and then you're going to kind of be like this, like, weird moment in time where you're like, okay, like, how many more busted is this going to go? And then there's going to be so many cards and you're like, Like, so like we right now we think consign's like insane, right? But like there's gonna be some couple cards that get printed for that, where like I think is gonna shift our attention away from consign in some of these strategies. If we look at how history's gone with Modern Horizons, and I'm not trying to go off, like completely off with this tangent, but like if you noticed, every time Modern Horizons comes out, the format gets so shaken to a point it cannot go back until the next one is printed.
So,
So
but we're not going to get a Modern Horizons. As the Wizards roadmap looks right now, there is no spot for the supplemental straight to modern sets, period. Unless next year we're getting 7 modern sets. Or 7 sets printed into standard. And it doesn't sound like Wizards has any intention to print supplemental sets that either are legacy or like eternal format only, so like Vintage Commander Legacy. They have like no desire to do that. They have, it seems like Modern Horizons 4 is put on not just the back burner but left in the cabinet for at least maybe the next year or two. And I don't think we're going to get Modern Horizons 4, but I also think we're in this spot because when did MH3 come out? 23?
24.
24, so
And then
last
MH2
year.
was 22.
Oh.
I feel like MH1 was like years before that, right?
So I think we're in a spot where nothing is going to, it's just going to be the Modern Horizons cards at the top until, you're right, Johnny, until we get the next set. But that next set, that could be indefinite.
That
We
could be
don't
2
know
years.
when that, it could be 3 years. It could never happen. As you know, with how Wizards is obsessed with Universes Beyond sets, which I mean, we're not going to get into that. We're not talking about that right now.
We're not going down
But-
that rabbit hole.
No.
Let's talk about that in 10 more episodes.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Stay
With-
tuned.
With how the format is right now, I don't see the format shaking until, you know, and we do get a few standard cards that do change up. Riddler is the card that really put a lot of these blink decks on the map. I mean, they existed, but Riddler is like now just the glue that holds these decks together. But you're right, it is all these MH3 cards, and I don't know where we go from this because we're not getting another set, maybe ever.
Yeah.
All right.
So I
hot
actually
take
want to.
real quick before
Yeah.
we go on. Since we're on hot take rabbit holes for a second. Here's how you solve this. Turn Pioneer into modern card pool minus Modern Horizon sets, and turn Modern into that plus Horizon sets. Fix the problem. Fix both sets, both formats.
Do we even think Pioneers are really that bad right now?
No, but
like,
I mean, kind of, but it opens up
I've-
some opportunity for, you know, having a format without the Horizon sets to see what true Modern would be.
Yeah.
the only comment I had to that was because I think the last Pioneer event I went to, that was a 5K, that we all thought like, okay, like the entire meta is going to be mono red. It was not. Everybody was like, we're just going to play what we want to play and we're going to ignore mono red. And it was kind of like, and it was like really interesting, right? Because I like prepared mainly for mono red and like maybe one other deck. And then I played against like all these food decks, all these different like black-white decks and like control mirrors. And it was like, I actually think I hope that like we get some support for Pioneer, because I think I want to know how bad that format is. I mean, I grind some games on Arena here and there, but I just don't know. Like, is this a point where we like, because we were kind of talking about it the last episode about what, you know, whether issues with standard. I'm like, I wonder if is Pioneer ready to give it a go again, or can't be that much worse.
So I was gonna try and move us along, but I actually just can't help putting in my own hot take. And mine has to be, I actually love the Horizon sets, but I am also happy if they don't print another one for a very, very long time, if ever. And I think a lot of that is Modern does need to be shaken up at times or else it'll get stale. I almost want to say Modern is in the perfect place right now. I think it might be the healthiest format we have ever seen in any format ever, period. I really think that. And when you look at the diversity of all these decks and you see how the meta keeps shifting and bringing in new things, and now Jeskai Blink is the top of the list, but Jeskai Blink is actually really new. Before that, Goblin Charbelcher was the top. Before that was Boros Energy, and to be fair, Boros Energy did require a couple of bans, so did Grief. But we haven't seen bans in quite a while, and yet we're still seeing the meta kind of churn and roll as things continue to move. And I think that's what an ideal format should look like, that we can continue to shuffle some pieces around. I think it's going to be a long time before it is this modern format as it stands is legitimately stale and needs to be shaken up. There's just so much ability for the best deck to change and move, for new brews to be a thing. I mean, the Scepter chant list that came in the finals had exactly one new card in it, I believe, and it was Consult the Star Charts. And a couple people have already been trimming those from their lists anyway, and I guess Stock Up from Aether Drift, there was a one of in there. But I think that there's so much room for brewing in Modern that's in such a healthy place that we can kind of see Magic gets to be played at its peak in what Modern is, but that's certainly more of an opinionated statement for me there. But I think it's really healthy where it's at. If they do print another Modern Horizons, they need to wait until this current Modern format is stale, and there is no signs of that happening. I mean, Simic Ritual, fresh new deck on the scene, making waves. Prowess suddenly is back and good. Well, all kinds of new things are constantly happening and changing, and there's a lot of time for us to still sit and wait and find out what Modern is going to look like before we make any changes. Well, with that, I appreciate you all greatly for joining us for yet another episode. I hope you guys liked the feel of this one. It was definitely a little bit more conversational. We had a little bit less for our railroad tracks today. But I hope you all enjoyed all the content you got to hear, everything you got to hear us talk about, as well as everybody's hot takes on the format. And Vegas is coming up, so there's a lot of prep work to get done. Next week, we plan to come in with a really big statistical conversation about what Vegas is going to look like and how we need to be prepared. We're going to discuss a lot of what we're planning to do. So definitely tune in. If you're going to be going to Vegas, tune in, try and follow up to make sure you can get a good idea of how to perform at that RC. Alrighty, there's one last topic. I was hoping people would forget, but they didn't.
Oh, no one's
Riftbound.
forgetting this.
Yep, we've got to talk
Anyway.
about Riftbound. Riftbound, the new League of Legends trading card game. I'm actually a big League of Legends gamer myself, but it's this new card game that is making a really big splash, and we want to talk about it for just a few minutes. So, Jake, Paul, you were the two who've really been enjoying Riftbound. Tell me all about it.
Hi, Season 2 League of Legends player here. I love Riftbound. So I've got a long, complex history with the League, and I will be the
Doesn't
first one to say,
everybody?
yeah, you do not need to be a League player to play Riftbound.
I was never a League
it
player, and I
does-
love Riftbound.
Yeah, it does help with understanding the characters a little bit. A lot of the characters' abilities mirror what they do in the game. But if you like card games that play a little bit more like a board game, then I think Riftbound's for you. I really like Riftbound. I think the gameplay mechanics are cool. I think the concept of earning points instead of losing a life total is a unique and cool and great system. I think the rune system and Magic, all Magic players, you have lands. In Riftbound, you have runes, which you only have two colors max in your deck as of right now. And I kind of hope they never change that. But the rune system is really cool, where the runes help tap and pay for your cards, but they also are sacrificed as part of the cost for the cards, but you do get 2 runes each turn. I think the system is really cool. The cards look and feel cool. Paul, what do you got?
You touched on my biggest enjoyment of the game with the rune system. Lincoln, you haven't really touched Riftbound whatsoever, right?
I have not, but I am pretty familiar with it.
Okay, so as a Magic player, worst feeling in the world is getting mana screwed, right? You can't do anything. But if I told you you can take your lands out of your deck and put them in a pile and you get 2 per turn, that fixes a lot of the problem. Now, obviously, in Magic, that'd be broken as heck. But Riftbound fixes that problem, like Jake said, by making you sacrifice runes every turn. And the gameplay is just so interactive. And it scratches the itch that Magic has, but it also is a little bit more unintuitive isn't the word. It's a different thought process on how the priority system, especially in combat, works. You really have to think about it a different way, because as the attacker, you get priority to do stuff first. So, and your opponents cannot respond until you let them. You can't respond to creatures. Creatures aren't spells. So it's a very similar but also just different enough experience that is super fun.
One thing that I really appreciated about Riftbound, and hear me out, I do intend to try out Riftbound. I want to stay focused on Magic with the RC coming up. I feel really confident and I want to pay a lot of attention to it right now, but I do intend to give Riftbound a try. One of the things that's really good about it is that it's highly interactive, and I know that was one of the big pieces of negative feedback surrounding Lorcana. Is that Lorcana is all sorcery speed, very minimal interaction, so Magic players had a hard time getting into it. But Riftbound has lots of ability to interact still that I think makes it in a really healthy place for Magic players to transition into, and a lot of those skills are going to translate.
Yeah, we had an impromptu tournament last night just because enough people were interested in it. And I looked around the room, and it was an RCQ. It was the RCQ grinders where we were here just jamming this new card game. And everybody was just having a blast.
Played tonight, and there was not a frown in the room. Everyone was smiling. Everyone was looking like a great time. You know what? The only people who were sad there tonight were the people that weren't playing Riftbound because they were playing other games. Actually, they were the Yu-Gi-Oh players, but that's a different story. But no, Riftbound's really cool. I'm excited to see where the game goes from here. I don't think it's ever going to replace Magic.
No, not at all.
But if you're, in the need for a breath of fresh air for TCGs, and you know what, give it a try. If you got friends who have decks, ask to borrow it. That's all I got.
Yeah,
I've
it's
got my
great.
Riftbound mic there.
Off the
Wonderful.
soapbox.
All right. I think it's time for us to wrap up. Thank you all for listening. I hope you had a really good time with this. Give Riftbound a try if you haven't already. And we're going to spend a lot of time focusing on preparing for this RC coming up in Vegas. So thank you all for tuning in. Spending any amount of time with us is so valuable. Life is short. Time is precious. And whether you're listening to us on your commute, when you're driving, wherever you're going, whether you have us running in the background while you work, while you play leagues and MTGO, whatever it is you're doing, it means a lot to us that you would make us any part of your life. So we appreciate that greatly. We hope you enjoyed this episode. We hope to see you again in our future ones.
Don't forget to check out ImpactGamingCenter.gg and the social medias at twitch.tv/ImpactGamingCenter and Impact Gaming Center on YouTube.
Yeehaw. Thank you all. Catch you next time.
See ya.